Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi wa kafa wa salamun ala ibadihi alladhina istafa amma ba'd. So we are on here أو تنتهي غاية الإسناد إلى التابعي, or the isnad ends with a tabi'i, وهو من لقي الصحابي كذلك. And the tabi'i is the one who has met the sahabi in the same manner. In the same manner as in man laqiya sahabiyya bil iman wa mata ala al iman wa in takhallalat al ridda. So the same condition. However, as Imam Ibn Hajar Asqalani rahmatullahi alayhi has mentioned previously, that tashbih doesn't necessarily mean that there has to be tashbih in everything. So he will exclude certain things. وَهَذَا مُتَعَلِّقٌ بِاللُّقِيِّ وَمَا ذُكِرَ مَعَهُ. So this relates to the meeting and everything else that was mentioned, like who saw the Prophet ﷺ with Iman, and وإن تخلت الردة, etc., etc. إلا قيد الإيمان به فذلك خاص بالنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وهذا هو المختار. Except that the condition of meeting with Iman is not the condition of Iman is not necessary. The meeting with Iman is not necessary. فَذَلِكَ خاص بالنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. This is only khas with the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. And this definition is the most preferred opinion. What that basically means, uh, uh, the one does not necessarily have to meet the Sahabi in the state of Iman. Any meeting of the Sahabi, as long as that person died with Iman, is sufficient for that person to be a Tabi'i. Okay, the khususiyat of believing in the Prophet, meeting the Prophet ﷺ while someone is a believer, that's a khususiyat specific to the Prophet ﷺ. But as far as a Sahabi is concerned, the condition is that one has to meet the Sahabi, but doesn't necessarily have to be a Muslim at that time. But the condition of dying as a Muslim is a requirement, obviously. Yeah. So this is the هذا هو المختار. خلافا لمن اشترط في التابعي طول الملازمة أو صحة السماع أو صحة السماع أو التمييز, as opposed to those who say that one of the conditions of somebody becoming a tabi'i is they need to have stayed in the company of the sahabi for a long time, or that uh, they their sima or their sama, their audition and receiving of hadith is sahih, or أو التمييز they're on they are in the age of discretion, where they are able to distinguish between things. So there are three opinions here. One is that some people have made it a condition that in order for somebody to be a tabi'i, they need to have spent quite a long time with the sahabi. Okay. Another opinion is that they should be old enough. Okay, they should be old enough to hear, audition, receive hadith, not necessarily teach hadith, to receive hadith, and or so even like receiving hadith, what is the age for that? Then there's quite a lot of discussions on this amongst the scholars. Uh, let's say Yep. If I was to, where is it? Can you see al-Muhaddis al-Fasil? There we go. Yeah. Yeah, so there is a clear distinction between when one can do sama' and when one can do ada. So for ada, it's a later age, but for sama, the age is earlier. So they're saying sihatu sama, as far as one is able to receive hadith or tamyiz. Tamyiz basically means that they're old enough to be able to discern age of age of discernment. Um, so, however, these are marjuh, غير مختار opinion. The مختار opinion is من لقي الصحابي كذلك وهذا هو المختار. And this is why people like Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi, although he was a little child, he saw Sayyidina Anas radiallahu ta'ala anhu. He does not do riwayat from Anas radiallahu ta'ala anhu, but he is considered from the Sigar at-Tabi'een. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yep.
وبقي بين الصحابة والتابعين طبقة أخرى. There remains another طبقة between the Sahabi and the Tabi'een. Okay, another classification. اختلف في إلحاقهم بأي القسمين. Ulama have disagreed on associating with either of the two. Some have said that they are Sahaba, others have said that they are Tabi'i. Okay, wahum, but the dominant opinion in that is that these people are Tabi'i. Wahum al-Mukhadramun alladhina أدركوا الجاهلية والإسلام ولم يروا النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. And these are the Mukhadram or the Mukhadramiyun, such as Najashi, such as Abu Uthman al-Nahdi, such as Abu Muslim al-Khawlani, and other Mukhadramiyun. There are quite a few of them who are actually Mullah Ali Qari mentions a name of few of them. Like they came right when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed. So some came when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they just came and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away, and there was one who came. So for example, جبير بن نفير فإنه أسلم وهو بالغ في خلافة أبي بكر، وبعض بمن أسلم في حياته صلى الله عليه وسلم كزيد بن وهب فإنه رحل إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقبض النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وهو في الطريق. So Zayd ibn Wahab traveled towards the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, but the Prophet died and he was in the road. وكذا وقع لقيس بن أبي حازم وأبي مسلم الخولاني وأبو عبد الله الصنابحي. There's another Sahabi by the there's a Sahabi by the name of Abu Abdullah Sunabihi. He comes in Tirmizi, but this is another person. مات النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قبل قدومهم بليال وأقرب من هؤلاء سويد بن غفلة قدم حين نفذت الأيدي من دفنه صلى الله عليه وسلم. Suwaid ibn Ghafala, he came and the people have just buried the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there are all of these people. What do we class them as? Do we class them as Sahabi or do we class them as Tabi'i? So they have a special position. These are called the Mukhadrimiyun. As far as their names are concerned, Mukhadrami are those man adrakul Jahiliyyah wal Islam who were there before Nabuwat, but also there during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, but they did not meet or they did not see the Prophet ﷺ. This is a tabaqa. Okay. فعدهم ابن عبد البر في الصحابة. So Imam Ibn Abdul Bar in his book Al-Isti'ab, on Sahaba, he includes the Mukhadramiyun that these الصحابة وادعى عياض وغيره أن ابن عبد البر يقول إنهم صحابة وفيه نظر. Imam Qadi Iyad and others said Ibn Abdul Barr calls him Sahabi, but this is a problematic position لأنه أفصح في خطبة كتابه بأنه إنما أوردهم ليكون كتابه جامعا مستوعبا لأهل القرن الأول. He clearly mentions in the khutbah that he has included them in his book so that his book can be a wholesome compilation of people who lived in the Qarnul Awwal. Okay, in the period of the Sahabis. So then you have two types of categorization. Then you have a tabaqa zamanan, and then you have a tabaqa rutbatan, right? If you are going to look at the zamana, the time and the era, then those who take it into consideration the zamana, like Imam Ibn Abdul Barr has taken into consideration, then they include them within the Sahabi. Those who take into consideration the rutba is the status, whether they saw the Prophet ﷺ or not, then they include them in the tabi'een. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah.
والصحيح أنهم معدودون في كبار التابعين سواء عرف أن الواحد منهم كان مسلما في زمن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كالنجاشي أم لا. Whether it is known that one of them was a Muslim during the time of the Prophet ﷺ's time, such as Najashi, or it wasn't known at that time. But the fact that he was a Muslim, we know that Sayyid al-Tabi'een is Uwais al-Qarni. لكن إن ثبت أن so then Imam Ibn Hajar Asqalani, he's given us the actual mas'ala, and then he goes on to some اختلاف issues. He says لكن إن ثبت أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ليلة الإسراء كشف له عن جميع من في الأرض فرآهم فينبغي أن يعد من كان مؤمنا به في حياته إذ ذاك وإن لم يلاقيه في الصحابة لحصول الرؤية في حياته صلى الله عليه وسلم. However, if it is established that on the day of Isra, night of Isra, the entire world was opened up to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, فينبغي, then it necessitates that all of those people who believed in the Prophet ﷺ and were alive at that time, إذاك, even though they did not meet the Prophet ﷺ, they are Sahaba because the Prophet ﷺ saw them in his lifetime. And therefore, these Mukhadramiyun, according to this, if it is established, then they are also Sahaba. So the reason why the Mukhadramiyun are called Mukhadramiyun, because Khadram basically means to cut the ears of camels, etc. And these particular people, one opinion is that they used to cut the ears of, they were living amongst kuffar. They did not meet the Prophet for whatever reason. They used to cut the ears of the camels, indicating that they were Muslims. This seems like a weak opinion. Imam Nawawi and others have counted that there are only 20 mukhadram, but Mullah Ali Qari says that there are more than that. Another opinion is that the word khadram basically means qata, and it basically means that these people are mukhadram because they are munqati'. They are cut off from the rest of the Muslims of their time, i.e., the rest of the Muslims of their time are Sahaba, and they're kind of cut off from that suhba, from that sharaf, and that's why they're called mukhadramiyun. So they have a special status. Now, coming on to this statement that Imam Ibn Hajar Asqalani mentions, he is the muhaddith par excellence. But he doesn't, he says in thabata, if it is established, but he doesn't go into, and he doesn't tell us whether it is established or not. He just left it as a cliffhanger. Mullah Ali Qadi and others, they take this issue up and they say, well, everything that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam does within the kashf, that is haqq and it is haqiqa. But however, the suhbah and the sahabiyya relates to the zahir and not to the kashf, and therefore, because zahir and nothing happened, these people will not be called sahabi. Because when we open it up to kashf, then we become problematic. It becomes problematic. People will say, "Oh, in my kashf, I saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, etc., etc." Or the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had a kashf about me, etc., etc. So that becomes problematic. The Ulum al-Hadith is kind of an empirical science. It's an empirical subject rather than a mystical subject where things are established. So there are entire discussions in Ulum al-Hadith, not in the Nuzha, but in higher books of Ulum al-Hadith, relating to what is the status of kashf vis-a-vis establishing of hadith. Okay, so this discussion is finished now. He's going on to kind of finishing of this, wrapping up the entire discussion. Are there any questions before we move on?
My only question is, why is there seem to be more of a criteria when it comes to the tabi'i, like stricter criteria than with the sahabi? Because
No, it's the opposite. It's not. The criteria for the Sahabi is more stricter. The criteria for the Tabi'i is that they need to at least have met or saw the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Iman is not a shart in meeting or seeing.
oh, okay, so the tabi'i can meet the Prophet ﷺ
Sorry,
and
so
not
the Tabi'i, sorry, not the Prophet. Tabi'i sees the Sahabi. It's not a condition for the Tabi'i to have seen the Sahabi or met the Sahabi whilst they were Muslims.
right,
Why?
right. But with the sahabi, they must have iman when they met the Prophet ﷺ.
Yep.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So the condition for
Is there a reasoning behind that
yeah,
that the
because the sharaf of suhbah, because the sharaf of the Sahabi is such a great sharaf that the conditions for them is narrow. Yeah.
got it.
فالقسم الأول مما تقدم ذكره من الأقسام الثلاثة وهو ما تنتهي إليه غاية الإسناد. So the first qism from what we have mentioned from the three types, i.e., where the isnad ends, the first one is called the marfu'. The marfu' is the first one. كان ذلك الانتهاء بإسناد متصل أم لا. So remember we said غاية الإسناد ما تنتهي إليه ما ينتهي إلى الإسناد إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. So when the isnad ends with the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, this is called مرفوع. Irrelevant of كان ذلك الانتهاء بإسناد متصل أم لا. Irrelevant of whether that intiha is whether the Prophet ﷺ sitting at the end is preceded by a muttasil, a continuous chain, or whether the chain is broken. والثاني الموقوف وهو ما انتهى إليه الصحابي. The second is موقوف, and موقوف is the one which ends at a sahabi, and the third, what we just discussed today, is the مقطوع وهو ما انتهى إليه التابعي, is the one where the isnad ends at the tabi'i. So remember I told you مرفوع, موقوف, and مقطوع, these are sifat of the matan. Who is the sayer? Is it the Prophet? Is it the
Right.
Sahabi? Is it the Tabi'i? And the other stuff that we have spoken about, muttasil, munqati', mu'allaq, mu'dal, mursal, these are sifat of the isnad. Okay, so let's not get confused. Yep. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yes.
I know we went over this two different times, but explain to me one more time simply this concept just so we can
Okay, so
wrap our
so
heads around it.
so there are two. When we talk about a hadith, we basically mean the hadith is the composite of the isnad and the matan. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah. Now the matan, which is the text, can either be coming from the Prophet, or it can be coming from the Sahaba, or it can be coming from a tabi'i. Do you accept
Right.
that or not?
Yes.
So if it comes from the Sahaba, it is called marfu. If it comes from the Prophet, it's called marfu. If it comes from the Sahaba, it is called mawquf, and if it comes from a tabi'i, it is called maqtu'.
Right.
So marfu, mawquf, maqtu' are sifat of the matan. It
The method.
tells us who is the author of that matan. Have you understood that?
Yes. Who's the source of the text that is being spoken? Right.
Yes. Now, as far as the isnad is concerned, marfu, mawquf, and maqtu don't talk about the isnad. They only talk about the source of the information. Who is it?
Right.
Now, as far as the isnad is concerned, the isnad can be continuous, meaning that there is nobody missing in the link, or the
Right.
isnad can be munqati', and the different variations of munqati', which is
Right.
mu'allaq, mu'dal, mursal. Okay,
Right.
so
Okay.
when we talk about muttasil, munqati', mu'dal, mursal, these are all sifats of the isnad, and they've got nothing to do with the matan. So
Right.
you can have an isnad which is continuous all the way up to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that's qala Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This isnad is muttasil, and the matan is marfu'. Or you can have
Right.
an isnad which is mursal. Mursal means the sahabi is missing, so there's a person missing, and the tabi'i is saying qala Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this isnad is mursal, but the matan is marfu'. Or you can have an isnad which is munqati', where people are missing in the middle, or mu'dal, but the matan is still marfu', as long as it says qala Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when we say marfu', mawquf, maqtu', we are giving a value judgment on the matan. We are not making any judgment about the isnad and the type of
Got it.
isnad. Does that make
So
sense?
makes sense. So just to highlight an example to see if I understood your point correctly. So if a tabi'i is saying something and the tabi'i is the one giving the quote,
Yeah,
then that is maqtu'a. But if the
yeah,
tabi'i is saying قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم and is not mentioning the sahabi, that is mursal.
that is mursal. But because it has qala Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it is marfu'.
It is marfu', right? Because it goes to
Yeah,
the right. Got
does that make sense? Because
it.
this text, the text, the isnad ends with the Prophet, so it's marfu'.
It's marfu'.
But
Okay.
the isnad is broken, it is mursal.
Got it.
Does that
Okay.
make sense?
Yes.
ومن دون التابعي من أتباع التابعين فمن بعدهم فيه أي في التسمية مثله. And anyone who is uh, um, below the tabi'in, for example, like atba'u tabi'in, the followers of the followers, and anyone who comes after them, they are the same. Like, for example, their words are maqtu'. If they have an isnad, then we call it maqtu'. Yeah. So you might have an isnad uh, um, all the way up to Imam Abu Hanifa. This is just technically speaking is maqtu. It doesn't really have any value as far as Ulum al-Hadith is concerned, because Ulum al-Hadith is not really about establishing the opinions of tabi'ins. He just categorized it for the sake of categorization. So anything below the tabi'i, if it has an isnad, then these are all maqtu'. أي مثل ما ينتهي إلى التابعي في تسمية جميع ذلك مقطوعا. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
وإن شئت قلت موقوف على فلان. And sometimes then people say it's mawqufun ala fulan. So you have to be careful that sometimes people use mawquf and maqtu' interchangeably, but they'll say mawqufun ala fulan. It stops at the following person. Yeah. فحصلت التفرقة أو تفرقة في الاصطلاح بين المقطوع والمنقطع. So there is a distinction in the terminology of مقطوع and منقطع. فالمنقطع من مباحث الإسناد. منقطع is from the topics of the إسناد كما تقدم. والمقطوع من مباحث المتن. And مقطوع is from the topics dealt with in the matan كما ترى. Did you understand that?
Yep.
Yeah,
Not
Omar?
really. Can we just
Okay, so you need to tell me what is a maqtu'?
Maqtu' was when the tabi'i is the source of the statement.
So are we dealing with the isnad or are we dealing with the matan?
We're dealing with the matan because the source of the matan is the tabi'i.
Okay, what is munqati'?
Munqati'. I don't remember what munqati' was off the top of my head. I think
Okay.
it was the one. Yeah.
Hussein, help him, please.
So munqati is related to the sanad, where there's a break in the chain. It's not.
Okay.
It's not fully connected.
Carry on reading, please.
So, for example, times. I'll try and avoid using terminology, but if there's somebody missing in the chain, like one person missing, say for example,
Right.
a tabi saying the Prophet ﷺ said this, or a tabi'i saying a sahabi said this, for example. There's somebody missing in the chain.
Right.
What's the opposite of munqati'?
Muttasil.
Muttasil. So because the word maqtu' and munqati', both of them have the word the root of qata' in them.
Right.
Imam Ibn Hajar is trying to show us, don't get confused. Maqtu' relates to the matan and munqati' relates to the isnad.
Got it. Okay. Understood.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yep.
And it's true. The terms are confusing. So I think you sent us something over with each term and the definition next to it. It's good to, I guess, print it out and have it in front of us so we don't get confused because some of these sound very similar.
Yeah. This is why he's saying it. فحصلت التفرقة في الاصطلاح بين المقطوع والمنقطع. فالمنقطع من مباحث الإسناد. منقطع is basically you making a judgment on the إسناد. والمقطوع من مباحث المتن. And مقطوع is basically you telling us who the source of the matan is. كما ترى. Does that make sense?
Yes.
وقد أطلق بعضهم هذا في موضع هذا وبالعكس تجوزا عن الاصطلاح. And sometimes people, to add to the confusion, sometimes they interchangeably use them. They use مقطوع to mean منقطع and use منقطع to mean مقطوع. تجوزا عن الاصطلاح, مجازا عن الاصطلاح, taking it outside of the reality of the istilah. But the reality is tajawuzan is to make something majaz. The haqiqat is that maqtu is min mabahis al-matan and munqati is min mabahis al-isnad. ويقال للآخرين أي الموقوف والمقطوع الأثر. So when we talk about the مرفوع موقوف and مقطوع, then موقوف and مقطوع is known as is so the mawquf and maqtu' hadith, if you want to call them hadith, are known as athar rather than so we say this is the athar of the sahabi, this is the athar of the tabi'i, so they are known. So where we say this is a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we don't actually say this is the athar of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we say this is the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But when we're talking about the tabi'i and the sahaba, so mawquf and the maqtu, we say it's the athar of Sayyidina Abu Bakr, it is the athar of Abu Hanifa. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Saying that the word athar is also used for hadith as well. It's not exclusive to mawquf and maqtu', but it in our everyday language we use the word athar. We normally don't say there is a athar of the Prophet. We say there's a hadith of the Prophet, but there's a athar of Abu Bakr or athar of Ibn Mas'ud. But the word athar is also used for hadith. For example, this book is called Nuzhat al-Nazar في توضيح نخبة الفكر في مصطلح أهل الأثر. Yeah, by Ahlul Athar, he means Ahlul Hadith. Similarly, Imam Tahawi's book, Sharhu Ma'ani al-Athar. Imam Tahawi's other book, Sharhu Mushkil al-Athar. So even by Athar here, he means Hadith. But it is more in vogue and more in use to refer to the Mawquf and the Maqtu' as Athar, as opposed to the Marfu'. The Marfu' is Hadith, Mawquf and Maqtu' is Athar. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Now there is a final terminology here, which is Musnad. Again, I will iterate that Muttasil, Munqati', Mu'allaq, Mu'dal, Mursal, these are all from the mabahis of the isnad. They tell us the status of the isnad, whether the isnad is broken or not, whether the isnad is broken in the beginning or is broken at the end or is broken in the middle, and whether there are two people missing or not. Right? These are mabahis of the isnad. Marfu', mawquf, maqtu'a, mabahis of the matan. They tell us who the source of the matan is. So when we say hadha hadithun marfu', we definitely know that this is a hadith from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. However, this does not tell us anything about the isnad, the nature of the isnad. The isnad can be muttasil. So you can have muttasil marfu'. You can have munqati' marfu'. You can have mu'allaq marfu'. You can have mu'dal marfu'. You can have mursal marfu'. Do you understand? Does that make sense?
Yes.
However, there is one istilah that if you use that istilah, it basically means that the isnad is muttasil, there is no break in the isnad, and the hadith is marfu'. And that terminology is al-musnad. Al-musnad is the one where the sanad is muttasil and the source is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So al-musnad is al-muttasil, al-marfu' is a composite term for that is al-musnad. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Wal-musnadu في قول أهل الحديث هذا حديث مسند هو مرفوع صحابي بسند ظاهره الاتصال. Musnad is the marfu' of the sahabi with the sanad which is apparently connected. ظاهره الاتصال. This is when we're talking about a hadith, individual hadith is musnad. We're not talking about the musnad of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. That has another connotation, right? The musnad of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal or the masanid as books is different from the musnad that we are talking about. Here we're talking about individual hadiths. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, the musnad is a hadith. The musnad as a book typology is opposed to the musannaf. Okay, the musnad as a book is opposed to the musannaf as a book. The musnad is all that book of hadith where the hadiths are arranged according to names of authors, such as the names of the Sahabi or the names of the Shuyukh. Musannafs are hadith books which are topically arranged according to Kitab al-Tahara, Kitab al-Salat. So Musnad Ahmad is musnad and Sahih al-Bukhari is a musannaf. Does that make sense? So that's a different distinction, different terminology. Here we're talking about when we refer to an individual hadith as a musnad, what do we mean by that? When we say a hadith is musnad, it means that the isnad is muttasil and the matan is marfu'. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. والمسند في قول أهل الحديث هذا حديث مسند هو مرفوع صحابي بسند ظاهره الاتصال. It's the marfu of the Sahabi, means the Sahabi has done rafa to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with a sanad which zahir of it is ittisal. Now he's going to break this up. The sanad is muttasil. فقولي مرفوع كالجنس, my saying مرفوع, مرفوع is jins, in the saying in is the wider kind of genus, and then وقولي صحابي كالفصل يخرج به ما رفعه التابعي فإنه مرسل. So he says that when we say مرفوع صحابي, right, he's saying this word sahabi is excluding the marfu'at of non-sahabis. For example, when a tabi'i says qala Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that hadith is marfu', but the isnad is mursal, and therefore you cannot call it musnad. Does that make sense? Because the sahabi is missing, and the musnad, the isnad
Right.
has to be muttasil. That's
Right.
why he mentioned the marfu' sahabi, the sahaba's rafa, because the tabi'i can do rafa, but when the tabi'i does rafa to the Prophet, that isnad is mursal.
Right. Right.
Sense.
Right. Right.
That's why he says مرفوع صحابي وقول صحابي كالفصل يخرج به ما رفعه التابعي فإنه مرسل, that it excludes that which the tabi'i has done rafa, raised to the Prophet ﷺ, because the raising of the tabi'i of a hadith to the Prophet ﷺ is called mursal. أو من دونه فإنه معضل أو معلق, or anybody below. So for example, if the sahabi is missing and the tabi'i is missing, so two people are missing, and the tabi'i, the student of the tabi'i, says qala Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or like for example, Imam, what's his name? No, Imam Imam Malik rahmatullah alayhi, so many times he says بلغني أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فعل هذا, or أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال هذا, that it has reached me that the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم did this or said this. These are known as balaghatul Malik. Between Malik and the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, there's a tabi'i and there's a sahabi. Okay, so two people missing. This is mu'dal, right? So the balaghat of Malik is marfu' but not muttasil. It's mu'dal. Does that make sense? Does that make sense?
I'm just getting a little confused with the terms, I guess.
Okay, let me get my writing pad out.
Yeah, I think we need the chart. That was the best, actually. For these, we need the chart.
I'm just trying to find my. Oh, there we go. Let me boot it up. Just give me 1 minute. Right. So if we have, say, muttasil, what is a muttasil?
متصل means no breaks in the chain of the isnad.
Yeah. Is that right? Continuous isnad. Then we have inqita'. Inqita', right? And then we have inqita' zahir, with the zahir is, you can see the inqita'. Number one is mu'allaq. What does mu'allaq mean? Break in the beginning. Of the isnad. Yeah. Number two, mursal. Why is mursal?
The tabi'i, the sahabi is not mentioned. So.
Yeah. So break in the end of the isnad. Does that make sense? Yeah. Number three is munqati'. Munqati' is break in the middle. In the middle of the isnad. Yeah. And then you have number four, mu'dal. Two consecutive breaks. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we have, so what is a musnad? Let's say we call this musannif, rawi, tabi'i, sahabi, rasul. Right? This isnad is called muttasil. Yep. And this matan is called marfu'.
Right.
Yeah. When the isnad is muttasil and the matan is marfu', that is called musnad.
Musnad. Yeah.
Yeah. When the isnad is muttasil and the matan is marfu' of sahabi.
Right.
The marfu' of a sahabi, because the marfu' of a sahabi basically means that the matan is muttasil, then that is called musnad. However, if you have a marfu' tabi'i, marfu' of a tabi'i, would that be called musnad?
No.
So no, it won't be called musnad because the isnad is not continuous. The isnad is not muttasil. The isnad
Right.
breaks at the sahabi is missing, and
Right.
therefore we will say this is marfu' tabi'i, but it's not. The hadith is marfu' because qala Rasulullah is there, but the isnad is not muttasil. The isnad is mursal, and
Right.
therefore this hadith cannot be called musnad. In order for the hadith to be musnad, it needs to be marfu'u sahabiyin. Marfu'u sahabiyin means there's no drop in the isnad. But when
Right.
you have a mursal, which is marfu'u tabi'i, the sahabi is missing. Therefore, this hadith cannot be musnad. Similarly, I was talking about mu'dal, right? So if we have, let's say, musannif, right, rawi, then we have Imam Malik here. Malik, he misses out one person, two person, Rasul. Yeah, this is
Mhm.
marfu'. It's marfu', but it's mu'dal. Mu'dal means when two people are missing in the isnad. So one person is missing, two person. Imam Malik says, "Balaghani anna Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam qala zalika." These are balaghat of Malik are actually mu'dalat because he misses two people or sometimes three people out. So these are actually mu'dal. So although it's marfu', the isnad is not muttasil and therefore you cannot call it musnad.
Right.
Musnad is when the isnad is muttasil, it is the marfu of the sahabi, and the isnad is completely muttasil. That is called a musnad. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
Yes.
Okay. Are you clear now?
Yes. This was very useful. Thank you.
Okay. So this is what he's talking about. He's saying والمسند في قول فقولي صحابي كالفصل. My saying مرفوع صحابي, it is like the exclusion يخرج به ما رفع التابعي. It excludes what the tabi'i does مرفوع of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. فإنه مرسل, because what the tabi'i does مرفوع to the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم is called mursal, because the isnad, there's a break in the isnad, isn't there? So so that's a mursal. In order for something to be a musnad, the isnad has to be muttasil and it has to be a marfu sahabi. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. You probably will have to kind of now look at the recordings. أو من دونه, or anybody below that فإنه معضل أو معلق, because anybody below that can be معضل or معلق. So for example here we found that Imam Malik is missing out two people and yet he's saying قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. The hadith is مرفوع but it's not متصل, and therefore it can't be musnad. It's mu'dal. The isnad is mu'dal. The isnad is not muttasil. Therefore it cannot be a musnad. Are you still with me, Hussein and
Yep.
Umar?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Remember this, that in order for something to be musnad, the isnad has to be muttasil, continuous isnad, and so all the way up to the Sahabi, and the source has to be the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. That combination makes it into a musnad. Only that combination, meaning that you can have a marfu', but if the isnad is not muttasil, because the isnad is mursal, or the isnad is muallaq, or the isnad is munqati, or the isnad is mu'dal, then it's what it is, but it's not a
Right.
musnad.
Right. Right.
وقولي ظاهره الاتصال, and he's saying where does he say مرفوع صحابي بسند, with the sanad ظاهره الاتصال. He's saying ظاهر الاتصال, that there is an apparent ittisal. يخرج به ما ظاهره الانقطاع. It excludes those where physically you can see that there is something missing because there is a person missing in the isnad. ويدخل ما فيه الاحتمال وما يوجد فيه حقيقة اتصال من باب الأولى. And also included in ظاهر الاتصال is those where there is a possibility of اتصال, but then there is a possibility of انقطاع, right? All is doing is excluding those where we know definitely there is an inqita'. For example, let's say Imam Malik says, Qala Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We definitely know that this is munqati', right? There is
Right.
inqita' mu'adal because Imam Malik did not see the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But there may be situations where the the isnad, the ittisaliya, the connectedness and continuous of the isnad might not be as apparent. For example, in the case of tadlis, remember tadlis is quite hard to detect, and the zahir, by looking at it, by looking at the isnad, it might basically seem that there is no zahiri, there is no inqita' there. So tadlis is not included in the definition of musnad because tadlis has an ihtimal of ittisal. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember what tadlis is? Tadlis
Yeah.
is when a rawi misses out his sheikh and narrates directly from the sheikh's sheikh, giving the impression that he's narrating directly from the sheikh.
From the
And this impression only comes about because the sheikh's sheikh is also his sheikh. So people will not doubt that he's. So because of that, so because there is an ihtimal that this is ittisal, an ihtimal that this is inqita', this is not included in his fasl of Zahir al-Ittisal. وما يوجد فيه حقيقة الاتصال من باب الأولى. So obviously that where there is a haqiqi ittisal, he's just basically saying what apparently looks like ittisal. So obviously the one where there is haqiqi ittisal min babil awla, it's obvious that that is of a higher degree. ويفهم من التقييد بالظهور أن الانقطاع الخفية. And it is understood from this condition of zuhur that those things which have inqita' khafi. So remember we were talking about inqita' zahir and inqita' batin. So those which have inqita' batin or inqita' zahir, such as an'anatul mudallis wal mu'asir alladhi lam yasbut luqiyuhu, and the mursal al-khafi لا يخرج الحديث عن كونه مسندا, does not take the hadith out of it being a musnad. لإطباق الأئمة الذين خرجوا المسانيد على ذلك, so that it applies perfectly with the ulama who have also included in those books of musnads riwayats which have mudallas in them, where the zahir is ittisal, but khafiyan there is inqita', but they've incorporated them in their masanid as well. وهذا التعريف موافق لقول الحاكم, and this تعريف is in conformity to what Imam Hakim has said. المسند ما رواه المحدث عن شيخ يظهر سماعه منه وكذا شيخه عن شيخه متصل إلى صحابي إلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. The Hakim said musnad is the one that a muhaddis has narrated from his sheikh, يظهر سماعه, where the sima' from his sheikh is apparent, and similarly the sheikh from his sheikh, until continues to the Prophet, to the Sahabi, to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says it just apparently apparent, but haqiqatan it might not be because it's tadlis. So we just go with the zahir. وأما الخطيب, as far as Khatib al-Baghdadi, he said al-Musnad al-Muttasil. Musnad is the isnad that is muttasil. فعلى هذا, according to this opinion, الموقوف إذا جاء بسند متصل يسمى عنده مستدا. The mawquf is, remember, the hadith where the source of the hadith is the sahabi, the author is the sahabi. So Imam Ibn
Right.
Hajar says, according to Khatib's opinion, if we say musnad, basically means that the isnad is muttasil, there's no break in the isnad. Then the isnad, that muttasil isnad that ends at a sahabi, which is a mawquf, is also a musnad. لكن قال إن ذلك قد يأتي لكن بقلة. He says this happens, however, this is seldom found. But Imam Ibn Hajar is basically not accepting that. He's basically saying, he's making this as a bizarre statement that no, if we were to take Khatib Baghdadi's opinion, then we will have had to also say that mawquf hadith, mawquf hadith can also be muttasil, which is not the case. But then he goes with a much more bizarre opinion of Ibn Abdul Barr. وأبعد ابن عبد البر حيث قال المسند المرفوع ولم يتعرض للإسناد. And even more bizarre or far away is Ibn Abdul Barr, who says that the musnad is another synonym for the marfu'. ولم يتعرض للإسناد, and he did not talk about the isnad. فإنه يشتق على المرسل والمعدل والمنقطع إذا كان المتن مرفوعا ولا قائل به. Because what Ibn Abdul Barr is saying, that will apply to the mursal, the mu'dal, the munqati', if the matan is marfu, and nobody says this. So actually, in reality, there are two things happening here. Number one is there is the isnad, and the isnad can have these features. It is if it's muttasil, it is muallaq, is it mursal, is munqati or mu'dal, and then we have the matans. The matan can either be marfu' or mawquf or maqtu'. Khatib al-Baghdadi basically says that musnad is the muttasil. He's basically saying musnad is a sifat of the isnad. Ibn Abdul Barr is saying al-musnadu al-marfu'. The musnad is a sifat of the matan. Imam Ibn Hajar saying both of them got it wrong. Musnad is a combination of the muttasil isnad and the marfu' of the sahabi. That is the only scenario where you can have a musnad. There is no other scenarios. The hadith is muttasil, and it's the sahabi who's doing rafa to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. We will leave the discussion here. We are on now a completely different discussion on ulu al-isnad. This discussion is one of the hardest discussions, especially ulu al-nisbi is one of the hardest discussions in the whole of the Nuzha. It will take a bit to understand. I think we will stop for now and resume after Ramadan. What do you say? Because it's going to be quite difficult to teach,
Yeah.
especially if third time is here as well. Yeah.